The house still smelled of roasted chicken and warm bread when the last guest finally stepped outside, the door closing with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have, and in that moment the evening seemed to exhale, leaving behind silence that felt heavier than the noise before it, and Emma stood alone in the kitchen for a few seconds, her hands resting on the counter, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock above the stove, feeling that familiar mix of relief and sadness that always came after gatherings, because she loved hosting but hated what followed, the quiet that reminded her how often she was alone, and Daniel's jacket was no longer on the chair because he had already left for his night shift, kissing her cheek quickly, promising to call if he had time, and she had smiled like she always did, understanding, supportive, proud. Yet as she turned toward the sink and saw the dishes piled high, the glasses half clouded with fingerprints, the leftover food waiting to be packed away, a small ache settled in her chest, the kind that came from carrying too much for too long without saying it out loud, and she rolled up her sleeves, ready to start, telling herself it would only take an hour, maybe less, when she heard a sound behind her, a quiet clearing of a throat, and she turned, surprised to see Michael still there, standing near the doorway like he wasn't sure if he belonged in the room anymore, his coat draped over his arm, his expression gentle but uncertain, and for a second Emma wondered if she had imagined it, because everyone else had rushed out, laughing, making plans, leaving her with the mess and the silence, but Michael hadn't followed, and he looked at her like he wanted to say something but didn't want to step too far, and when he finally spoke his voice was calm and polite, saying he could help clean up if she wanted, that it wasn't fair for her to do it alone after hosting all night, and Emma almost refused out of habit, because she had learned to say no even when she needed help, but her arms felt tired and her heart felt heavier than usual, and there was something kind and sincere in the way he asked, not pushing, not expecting, just offering, and she nodded before she could overthink it, telling him thank you, and the moment felt small and normal, yet something about it settled quietly in her thoughts, because Michael wasn't just anyone, he was Daniel's friend from college. The one who had stood beside him at their wedding, the one who showed up with coffee when Daniel was overwhelmed, the one who listened more than he talked, and as he set his coat aside and walked into the kitchen, Emma noticed how comfortable he seemed in the space, like he had been there many times before, which he had, but never like this, never after everyone else had gone, never in the stillness that followed a full house, and she handed him a dish towel while she turned on the water, the sound filling the room, giving them something to focus on, and they moved without speaking at first, Michael washing, Emma drying, their movements careful and efficient, and the pace was faster than the quiet suggested, because neither of them wanted the moment to stretch too long without purpose, and yet Emma became aware of how different it felt to not be alone, how the task seemed lighter, how the silence didn't press down as hard, and her thoughts drifted to how often Daniel missed these moments, not by choice but by duty, and she reminded herself again that she understood that this was the life they had built together, but understanding didn't always erase the feeling of being left behind, and as she placed a clean plate on the counter, she felt Michael glance at her, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but in a way that suggested concern, and she wondered if he could sense the weight she carried, because he had always been observant like that, noticing things others missed, and when he finally spoke, asking if she was tired, the question felt deeper than the words, and she answered honestly that she was, more than she realized, and he nodded like he already knew, like the answer confirmed something he had suspected but never voiced, and the clock kept ticking, the water kept running, and the night outside pressed against the windows, and Emma felt the strange awareness that this simple act of cleaning together had shifted something subtle, not because anything improper was happening, but because she felt seen in a way she hadn't expected, and she wondered, briefly, why moments of quiet honesty so often arrived when people least planned for them, and as she reached for another glass, her hand brushed Michael's for just a second, an accidental touch that made them both pause, not with shock, but with awareness, and they pulled back at the same time, exchanging a quick, polite apology, but the air felt different after that, charged not with desire but with realization, and Emma focused on her breathing, reminding herself that this was nothing, just a moment, just fatigue, just the end of a long evening, and yet a soft thought lingered at the edge of her mind, one she didn't fully recognize yet, that sometimes life revealed truths in ordinary moments, not loud and dramatic, but quiet and unexpected, and as the sink slowly emptied and the counter cleared, Emma didn't know that this night, which had begun like any other, would stay with her far longer than the smell of dinner or the sound of laughter, because something had already started to change, not in action, but in awareness, and she stood there drying the last dish, unaware that this was only the beginning of a story she never thought she would be part of. The kitchen felt smaller once the first few dishes were done, not because of the space but because the silence had softened, and Emma noticed how the steady work pulled her forward, keeping her hands busy while her thoughts wandered, and Michael moved with quiet focus, rinsing plates and stacking them neatly, his calm presence filling the room without effort, and the pace stayed quick as they worked, but the quiet between them began to feel less heavy and more thoughtful, and when Michael finally spoke, asking how she had been doing lately, not in a casual way but with a tone that suggested he truly wanted to know, Emma felt something tighten in her chest, because people often asked but rarely waited for real answers, and she hesitated before replying, choosing simple words, saying she was fine, that life was busy, that things were okay, yet the words sounded hollow even to her, and Michael noticed, pausing just long enough to look at her, not judging, not pushing, just waiting, and that small patience made her lower her guard, and she admitted that some days felt long, that being alone so often left her tired in a way sleep didn't fix, and she spoke faster than she meant to, like the truth had been waiting for a small opening, and Michael listened closely, nodding as if each word mattered, and he said he saw how much she did for Daniel, how she held things together quietly, and hearing that made her throat tighten, because it was rare for someone to notice the invisible work, and she quickly turned back to the counter, drawing a bowl to hide the emotion rising in her eyes, and the water kept running, the clock kept moving, but the conversation had shifted into something more honest, and Michael shared that he admired her strength, not in a dramatic way, but as a simple fact, and Emma felt a warmth that surprised her, not because of romance, but because of being understood, and she admitted that loving someone who was always needed elsewhere came with pride and pain mixed together, and Michael said he understood that too, that he had seen how Daniel leaned on her even when she wasn't there, and that he wished Daniel would slow down enough to see how much she carried, and the words weren't meant to create distance between her and her husband, but they highlighted a truth she often pushed aside, and the pace of their work stayed steady, dishes moving quickly from sink to counter, yet the space between them felt filled with unspoken thoughts, and Emma became aware of how safe the conversation felt, how there was no pressure, no hidden demand, just two adults speaking honestly in a quiet kitchen, and that safety made her open up a little more, admitting that sometimes she missed being asked how her day was, missed being the center of someone's attention, even briefly, and Michael's expression softened, and he said that anyone would feel that way. That wanting connection didn't mean wanting something wrong, and those words stayed with her, because she had often judged herself harshly for those feelings, and the night outside deepened, the windows reflecting the warm kitchen light, and for a moment Emma forgot about the time, forgot about the world beyond the sink, because the conversation had given her something she hadn't realized she needed, and when Michael reached for another plate and their shoulders brushed lightly, neither pulled away too fast, not because of desire, but because neither wanted to break the calm that had formed, and Emma felt a quiet awareness settle in, not excitement, but clarity, that emotional closeness could appear without warning, and that it didn't always come with intention, and she reminded herself again that this was Daniel's friend, that boundaries mattered, but she also recognized that denying the moment's meaning would be dishonest, and the last few dishes were finished quickly, the task nearly done, yet neither felt ready to end the conversation, and Emma realized that this part of the evening, the quiet honesty, the shared understanding, was more memorable than the dinner itself, and as she placed the final glass on the counter, she felt a gentle tension in the air, not dangerous, but delicate, like something that could either fade or grow depending on what came next, and she sensed that whatever happened, this night had already changed how she saw herself, and that realization followed her like a shadow as she turned off the water and stood there beside Michael, both of them aware that the simple act of cleaning had become something deeper than either had planned. Once the last plate was set on the counter and the sink finally emptied, the kitchen felt unusually still, not just from the absence of noise but from the weight of the conversation and the quiet connection that had grown between them, and Emma noticed how close Michael stood, not physically close enough to be inappropriate, but close enough that his presence filled the space, making it feel warmer, softer, more human, and he leaned casually against the counter, hands in his pockets, looking at her with a mixture of admiration and thoughtfulness that made her heart beat slightly faster, not from desire, but from the recognition that someone could truly see her for who she was, without pretense, without expectation. And he spoke quietly, saying he had always admired her, the way she supported Daniel, the way she managed so much with grace and patience, and Emma felt a lump in her throat, because the words were honest, heartfelt, and they carried weight, not in a romantic way, but in a way that reminded her that kindness and attention could feel profound when it came unexpectedly, and she tried to respond lightly, but her voice caught. Because admitting to being noticed and appreciated outside of her husband's eyes was both comforting and unnerving, and Michael quickly added that he knew boundaries mattered, that he respected her and Daniel completely, but he wanted her to know she was valued, not as someone's wife, not as a caretaker, but as herself, and the truth of that statement hit her in a way that made the kitchen feel smaller, more intimate, more charged with unspoken understanding, and Emma glanced down at her hands, twisting the dish towel slightly, realizing that this moment could have gone many ways but hadn't, that it was a fleeting pause in life's chaos, a chance to simply exist as herself and be recognized, and then she reminded herself of Daniel, of the man she loved, of the life they were building together, and she stepped back slightly, creating space between herself and Michael, softly telling him that he should probably leave soon, that she appreciated the help, and that he had already done more than expected. And Michael nodded, a hint of regret in his eyes, because he knew how close the conversation had brought them, how emotions could blur lines even when intentions were clear, and he said he was sorry if he had overstepped. That wasn't his intention, but Emma shook her head, saying he hadn't crossed a line, not really, and that it was okay to feel and to speak honestly, yet she also recognized the delicate boundary that needed to remain, the one that kept trust and loyalty intact, and as Michael walked toward the door, she noticed how heavy the air felt, how words left unsaid hovered in the room like soft shadows, and she locked the door behind him, feeling both relief and an unexpected ache, because even though nothing improper had happened, the emotional intimacy they had shared lingered, and she realized how easily hearts could drift in quiet moments, how honesty could be both a gift and a challenge, and when she leaned against the door, she allowed herself a slow breath, acknowledging the rush of emotions that came from feeling understood, noticed, and appreciated, emotions that were safe but intense, and for the first time in weeks, she felt fully aware of her own heart, of her desires for connection, of the spaces in her marriage that sometimes went unnoticed, and she promised herself she would carry the lessons from this night forward, not with guilt, not with shame, but with clarity, understanding that fleeting moments of genuine human connection could teach her more about love, attention, and presence than she had expected. And as she stood there alone, the quiet kitchen now fully hers again, Emma realized that life often offered unexpected reflections in ordinary tasks. That cleaning dishes could bring honesty and emotion, that friendships could reveal truths about her own needs and feelings, and that the night, which had started like any other, had quietly rewritten the way she understood herself, her relationships, and the delicate balance between connection and loyalty. The night stretched on long after Michael had left, leaving Emma alone with her thoughts, the quiet of the house wrapping around her like a soft, heavy blanket, and as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she replayed every detail of the evening, the way Michael had moved around the kitchen, the gentle way he had listened, the unspoken understanding that had hung in the air, and she realized that what had happened wasn't dangerous or improper, but it had touched something deep inside her, a part of her heart that longed to be seen, understood, and appreciated beyond her role as a wife or caretaker, and the reflection made her aware of how much she had been missing the emotional closeness she craved, not from Daniel's absence, but from the busy rhythm of life that often left her feeling invisible, and she thought about Daniel's dedication to his work, the late nights at the hospital, the way he loved her fiercely yet sometimes unknowingly left her alone with the weight of the house and their life together, and that realization wasn't resentment but awareness, a gentle, aching recognition that marriage was a partnership that required attention to both hearts, and she also thought about Michael, about the careful way he had respected boundaries, the kindness in his words, the clarity in his gaze, and she felt gratitude for the honesty and care he had shown, not guilt, because he hadn't crossed any lines, but the encounter had reminded her of what it felt like to be truly acknowledged, and that feeling lingered with her like a soft echo, reminding her that emotional intimacy could exist in many forms, that connection could come unexpectedly, and that recognizing her own feelings didn't diminish her love for Daniel, it only highlighted the depth of her heart and capacity to feel. And as dawn approached, Emma's thoughts turned to the conversation she knew she needed to have with Daniel, not about Michael, not about temptation, but about presence, attention, and the effort it took to maintain closeness in a busy life. And when Daniel returned home exhausted the next morning, she met him at the door, wrapping her arms around him with a strength and warmth that surprised both of them, and she whispered that they needed to talk, that there were things they could improve, ways to connect, moments to cherish. And Daniel listened, tired but attentive, his hand on her back grounding her, and together they spoke about their time, their priorities, the love that ran deep but needed tending. And the discussion wasn't easy, but it was honest, raw in the way truth always is, and Emma felt relief, a soft weight lifting as they acknowledged each other's needs and fears. And the week that followed was different, subtle but significant, with small gestures, shared laughter, and a conscious effort to spend moments together. And Michael continued to visit occasionally, always maintaining his distance, respectful and kind, his presence no longer carrying the quiet intensity of that night, yet the understanding between them remained, a quiet acknowledgement of shared honesty and the human need to be seen. And Emma reflected often on the evening, realizing she didn't remember it for attraction or longing, but for the clarity it had brought. The reminder of how she wanted to live, love, and connect. And she carried that lesson into her marriage with Daniel, understanding that love wasn't just about grand gestures or constant presence, but about awareness, attention, and the courage to speak and listen with honesty. And as days passed, life returned to its usual rhythm, yet Emma felt stronger, more grounded, and quietly grateful, because what happened that night in the kitchen had been simple yet profound, a testament to human connection, empathy, and the way small, unexpected moments could illuminate the heart. And she knew that sometimes life didn't give what you expected, but what you truly needed. And holding that thought close, Emma stepped into the day with renewed love, hope, and understanding, ready to cherish the people in her life with deeper awareness and a heart fully awake to the beauty of presence and emotional honesty.